The lobby went silent as a security guard shoved the well-dressed black man toward the door. What nobody knew was that the man he pushed out owned the future of the very company he was guarding. Marcus had built an empire brick by brick, rising from a boy who once counted coins to keep the lights on, to a man whose signature could move millions. Yet despite all his success, there was a question that haunted him. Were people in his company treated with dignity, or only with respect when they appeared wealthy? He had heard whispers, complaints buried beneath paperwork, stories brushed aside as exaggerations. But Marcus knew better. He had lived that reality before fortune changed his life. So one gray morning, he decided to find out for himself. He left his mansion without his driver, trading in his sleek tailored suits for faded jeans, a plain jacket, and an old pair of sneakers. He pulled a baseball cap low over his forehead and stepped into a rideshare car instead of his luxury sedan. To anyone watching, he looked like an ordinary man with little to his name, just another customer hoping to be taken seriously. And that was exactly the point. As Marcus walked through the revolving glass doors of the bank's headquarters, the scent of polished marble and fresh coffee filled the air. The lobby stretched out in gleaming perfection, tall ceilings, golden lighting, polished floors that reflected every step. Employees in crisp suits moved briskly, heads high, voices hushed. Yet in that sea of wealth and confidence, Marcus felt the weight of eyes on him. Not admiration, suspicion. He walked slowly toward the reception desk, his heart steady but his mind alert. This wasn't about ego. It was about truth. For the first time in years, Marcus wasn't testing numbers or contracts. He was testing humanity. And what happened next would reveal just how far respect went when power wasn't visible. Marcus hadn't taken more than a few steps toward the front desk when a tall, broad-shouldered security guard stepped in front of him. The man's chest puffed out, his hand raised as though Marcus had crossed into forbidden territory. "Hold it right there," the guard barked. "This area is for clients only. You can't just wander in here." His voice carried enough bite to turn nearby heads, though most people quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Marcus kept his composure, his voice even. "I am here on business. I need to speak to someone at the desk." He pointed calmly toward the reception counter, but the guard only scoffed. His eyes scanned Marcus from head to toe, the worn sneakers, the simple jacket, the absence of wealth in his appearance. To him, Marcus wasn't a man of status. He was a problem to be removed. Business? In those clothes? The guard sneered, a smirk spreading across his face. Then, with a firm shove to Marcus's shoulder, he pushed him back a step. "Don't waste our time. People like you don't belong here." The shove wasn't violent enough to knock Marcus down, but it was deliberate, public, humiliating. Gasps rippled through the lobby. A young woman near the elevator covered her mouth. A man in a suit shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word. They all knew what had just happened, yet silence felt safer than speaking up. Marcus stood still, his jaw tight, his heart pounding beneath his calm exterior. He had been insulted before in his life, but this cut differently. Because he wasn't just a man denied dignity. He was the man who owned the very walls around them. Still, he said nothing. He turned slowly, walked out through the glass doors, and left the lobby buzzing with whispers. What no one knew was that humiliation had just set the stage for the most shocking return they would ever witness. Marcus walked out of the building with slow, measured steps, the sting of the guard's shove still fresh on his shoulder. The city streets bustled around him, but he hardly noticed the noise. His mind replayed every second. The dismissive tone, the eyes filled with judgment, the shove that said he was less than human. It wasn't anger that filled him now, but a deep, heavy disappointment. This was his bank, his vision, his company built on promises of fairness and opportunity. And yet, here it was, rotting from within, poisoned by the same discrimination he had fought against his entire life. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his study, a glass of untouched water by his side, documents spread across his desk. He didn't need to read them to know the truth. He was the majority shareholder, the man whose name signed every paycheck, the man who owned the very institution that had humiliated him. The irony was sharp, almost bitter. He thought about his childhood, about standing in grocery store lines where clerks assumed he couldn't afford what he carried, about doors that closed in his face before he even had a chance to knock. He had vowed to change that world. But somehow, even at the height of his success, prejudice had slipped into his empire unnoticed. By midnight, his decision was made. He picked up the phone and called for an emergency board meeting. When the directors' voices filled the line, Marcus's tone was steady but unyielding. "I was in the lobby today," he began. "I saw with my own eyes how we treat people who don't fit the picture of wealth, and I will not tolerate it. Tomorrow, we begin again." It was no longer about proving who he was. It was about proving what his company would stand for. The next morning, the lobby looked just as it always did. Polished marble floors gleaming under golden lights, executives rushing past in sharp suits, the scent of fresh coffee floating through the air. But there was a tension, a hum in the atmosphere that no one could quite name. Whispers had already spread that the board had been called to an emergency meeting, and everyone knew something important was about to happen. At exactly 9 o'clock, the glass door slid open, and Marcus walked in. But this time, there was no plain jacket, no worn sneakers. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, shoes that shone with each step, and a quiet authority that demanded respect before he spoke a single word. His stride was steady, controlled, unshakable. The same security guard from yesterday froze where he stood. His eyes widened, recognition dawning too late. He lowered his gaze, suddenly smaller, suddenly powerless. Marcus didn't spare him more than a glance. He walked past the desk, past the stairs, and stepped into the private elevator that carried him to the top floor. By the time he entered the boardroom, every director, manager, and senior officer was already waiting. The room fell silent when he walked in. Without a word, Marcus placed a thick folder of documents on the long mahogany table. His name was printed boldly across every ownership certificate inside. "I am the majority shareholder of this institution," Marcus said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. "And yesterday, I was pushed out of my own lobby like a trespasser. If this is how we treat people, then we are not the company I built. Today, we face the truth. Today, everything changes." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The boardroom erupted into uneasy murmurs, but Marcus raised a hand and silence swept across the table. His expression was unreadable, but his words were firm, each one striking with the weight of truth. "We cannot claim success if dignity is denied at our own doors. Yesterday, I was disrespected not as your boss, but as a black man who didn't look wealthy enough to matter. If this happens to me, imagine how many others have suffered quietly." His gaze moved across the room, pinning each director in place. No one dared to look away. There were apologies, stammered excuses, and nervous justifications. But Marcus wasn't looking for words. He was looking for action. Within days, sweeping changes were announced. Every employee, from top executives to lobby security, would undergo new training focused on respect, equality, and dignity. Anonymous reporting systems were put in place so voices could never again be silenced. The company launched initiatives to uplift minority clients and invest in underserved communities. What had started as humiliation was now fueling a movement of accountability. The security guard who shoved Marcus was dismissed, but his actions became a lesson that echoed in every meeting, every hallway, every branch of the company. And for Marcus, this was never about revenge. It was about transformation. He didn't just correct a wrong done to him. He rewrote the culture of an empire. News of the incident and its aftermath spread beyond the walls of the bank, inspiring others to demand fairness where silence once lived. People who had long been ignored now felt seen. Marcus had turned pain into power, humiliation into hope. And as he walked once more through the lobby, this time greeted with respect that was genuine, he knew one truth. Real power isn't in owning a company. Real power is in changing it for the better. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe now for more powerful and inspiring stories every day.